Hello. Good afternoon or good evening, everyone, depending on where in the world you are. Hi, thank you so much for joining me. My name is Victoria Prentice, and I am a senior dialogue engineer at Creative Assembly, and I work across all of our Total War series of games. So today I'd like to share a little bit about my journey into and through the games industry with you, how I got to where I am today, and hopefully share a few things that I learned along the way. But before I do, it might help to explain one thing first, and that is what a dialogue engineer is and what we actually do, because I imagine a lot of you haven't heard of this job role, which I don't blame you. I hadn't heard of it before. I actually started doing it myself. So the short answer is we handle everything involved in producing great dialogue for video games, although I'm sure you all figured that out already. I mean, there's a clue in the name right there. But it's actually a really varied job. It's got loads of really cool and fun aspects to it, some of which I've listed here. Things like scoping out what dialogue is needed for a game, casting actors for roles, putting those casting briefs together with members of the design team, directing and engineering recording sessions with those actors, and setting up the systems that allow the dialogue to be triggered correctly in game. And I am going to talk about some of these elements in more depth later on. But first of all, I thought I'd talk a little bit about how I ended up in this career, because I always think it's so important for people to share their paths into the games industry, because they're often so varied. You could talk to 100 different developers and get 100 widely different stories. So the more of us share these journeys into the games industry, the better, I think. So for me, it started, I actually did a degree in music at the University of Manchester and followed that up with a year of sound design at the University of the Arts London. And then after that, I did a couple of years as a freelance sound designer and composer, and got to work on loads of different fun projects, but not a lot of that was paid work. And, you know, I was still having to take temp jobs to pay the bills. So I decided I wanted to get more professional experience in, you know, professional recording studio environment. So what I did was I sent out my CV and showreel to pretty much every recording studio or production house that I could find in London, where I was based at the time. Basically asking, you know, could I just come in and observe for a bit? Could I learn? Do you have any roles at all? And if I could give one bit of advice to people who are doing this speculative application process, it would be that if you send out your CV and your showreel and your covering letter, if you don't hear anything back after a couple of weeks, there's no harm in just, you know, make a follow-up call. Just call the studio up, just check they got your application okay. Because this really paid off for me. If I hadn't have done this step, I actually wouldn't have managed to land my first industry job. And that was at a company called OM UK. So they are a studio that specialises in all aspects of dialogue production for video games. So they're an outsourcing studio that are used by loads of different game developers, from indie teams to AAA studios. As many devs don't have a dedicated dialogue team in-house like Creative Assembly, so they will go to a company like OM UK to handle the dialogue needs with their expertise. And when I started there, basically what I did was I looked for any opportunity I could to jump in, learn what I could, and I just tried to make myself an asset to the team, basically. And it really helped that I joined a really supportive team where that eagerness to learn was heavily encouraged. And just so you know, I hope that some of you have found this over the last 2 days of the conference. There are a lot of really lovely, good people in the games industry that are more than happy to help those of you just starting out. So if you are starting out, please don't feel intimidated. Please go and network, come and talk to us, because I promise we're a friendly bunch. We've all been where you are now, and we all want to help. So when I started at OM, I started as a dialogue editor, which meant I cleaned up the audio recorded in the studio and got it ready to go in the game, which meant a lot of time staring at screens like this. I don't know if you can see on the slide there, there's some vertical lines, which are all sort of mouth noises or clicks that need to be cleaned out before it can go into game. And after 6 months, I then moved on to engineer recording sessions in the studio, which was loads of fun. Being in the studio, I'd say, is still one of the best parts of my job. I've had times where I've been doubled over with laughter in a session and just having so much fun. And you just get hit by this wonderful realization of, hang on, I'm getting paid to do this. You know, this is how I'm paying my rent. How great is this? You know, and you just feel really lucky. And after that, I also started getting involved in casting actors for roles, doing project management. I got to represent the company around the world at different events. And I was even had the opportunity to fly out to LA to work on a big production over there, which was amazing. Part of being one of the great things about being part of an outsourcer is it's a great opportunity to give you the chance to work with loads of different developers. And, you know, it really gave me a chance to build relationships with creative people who are making games around the world. And my next step after this was moving into voice directing. Now, I'd like to take a bit of time here to talk about directing more in depth, because first of all, I think it's a really interesting part of my job that's not only given me a lot of good skills, but it's taught me a lot about myself. And it's also, I'd say, hands down, the thing I love most about what I do for a living. So at this point, I'd been at OM for a couple of years, and I was working in the studio a lot. And I found the stories that we were telling really engaging, you know, to the point where I was having to hide my surprise at plot twists that were coming up. And I really loved watching the director, actor, and developers working together to build characters and really bring them to life. So I wanted to try directing myself. So I spoke up and shared my ambitions with my boss. And again, I was very much encouraged, and he began to mentor me in directing. Now, at this point, I want to say this was quite a nerve-wracking move for me because, first of all, I was worried basically that I didn't have the right personality to become a director. I assumed you'd have to be one of those natural born leaders, you know, someone who could stride into a room and command the respect of everyone in it. And for an awkward and shy introvert, someone who definitely does not have that innate commanding presence, this was a real concern for me. But I had learned a lot working with loads of great directors over the years. And I knew that even if I failed miserably, this was something I just had to try. So I started directing and I just absolutely fell in love with it. And there were a few aspects to it that I wasn't expecting. Sorry about that. I've just got ahead of myself. Okay, yeah. So the aspects I wasn't expecting, I will move on to that slide in a second. So the first thing that surprised me was how organic the learning process was. You know, every director has their own unique style and has to develop an approach that fits with our personalities. So I found that instead of trying to be someone else, I was able to find a way to direct that worked for me and my personality. And the second thing I realized, which I'm sure a lot of you working in the games industry have found as well, is how much of an asset my years of playing games would be. So one of the chief roles of a director is providing context to the actor. As you all know, games can have vast detailed worlds and the stories are often non-linear. So your narrative could be influenced by actions of the player. It'll often branch and the structure can change completely depending on how you want to play. And even with a really well laid out recording script, this changing non-linear structure, it can be very confusing. So one of a voice director's main jobs is to make sense of this fast shifting structure and guide actors through these huge complex worlds that we've created. But through years of playing games myself, I found that I'd sort of organically absorbed the conventions or the language of games even. You know, I find it easy to identify things like tutorial text that would need to be clear, important information that needs to be communicated to the player and understandable, and lines of dialogue that were going to repeat a lot. So we had to make sure that they were not going to get fatiguing if you heard them too often. And, you know, because I, you know, had absorbed all these few years of playing games, it made it easier for me to communicate these ideas in a concise way. But I think the biggest revelation I've had from voice directing is the utter dispelling of this myth that you need to have a quote unquote strong personality. Putting yourself out there creatively, it can be a really vulnerable experience. You know, no matter how experienced you are, whether you're an actor, director, a writer, or a designer. I mean, how many of you watching have created something, poured your heart and soul into it, and then felt a little bit crushed when you just get a blunt rebuke, just like a, don't really like that, or fine, it's a horrible feeling, and it really puts you on your guard. So I wondered if a gentler, less confrontational approach might work, and thought I would try some things. So if I thought we should change track in a recording session or try something different, I'd present it as a suggestion. So, I've just had this idea. I'm not sure if it'll work, but what about if we tried this? And I did that because to me, that made complete sense. Art is subjective after all. What is great in one person's eyes will be completely wrong in another's. And you have to try different things in order to innovate. And sometimes those things work. And of course, sometimes they don't. And of course, I was trusting my instincts and I was drawing on my experience. But it felt really disingenuous to me to walk into these situations just stating, okay, we need to do this, this, and this. Absolutely going to work. This is what we're going to do. No argument. Because I wouldn't know if it was going to work until we tried it. And I found that this approach worked really well because if I was on the wrong track, it wasn't a big deal. And people, were still open and relaxed and more willing to share their thought processes and ideas with you. And if you were right, then most people are grateful for good suggestions. And you've proven that you know your onions and you know what you're talking about. So you've shown your skills, you've shown you care, and you've earned their trust. One of my main goals as a director is to get everyone in the studio feeling comfortable and confident, enabling them to be freer to experiment and collaborate. And I found that I was able to do this and lead a room full of talented creatives while still being myself. Now, I just want to take the time at the moment. I'm just going through my slides again. But yeah, I just want to quickly stress that this is not an approach that I felt I had to adopt because I was a woman in a male-dominated industry. I have spoken with a lot of male directors about this same subject, and they all agree that the studio should be a supportive environment. They all use words like empowering and empathetic to describe how they work, no matter their own personal directing style. And there are times where I have to be firm and assert myself, but by approaching directing in this way, I feel like I've built up my confidence to the point where I'm able to do that. So I'm going to go back to the career path now and talk about how I got to Creative Assembly. So at this point, I'd been at OM for about 6 years and I'm really loving it, really enjoying it. But it was starting to feel like I was kind of on the outskirts of game development, sort of orbiting it, on the outside of the fence, looking in. We'd work on a game, we'd hand over all our recorded assets, and then we wouldn't know how it was being used or what was being done with it until we played the release game months later. So I really wanted to work for an in-house game developer, but I assumed that I wouldn't be able to do that because I'd now specialized to such a degree in my career that I just assumed that there were no developers who would hire someone to just handle dialogue full time. And at this point, I'd just completely fallen in love with directing and didn't see how I'd be able to keep doing that whilst I was working for a developer. And at this point, I was contacted by Creative Assembly, and it turned out they had their own dialogue department in-house, and they were wondering if I was interested in joining the team. And they sent the job spec over to me, and I was just amazed. It turned out that they were looking for someone with pretty much my exact skill set and experience. They wanted someone who'd worked on dialogue for games, someone who could engineer and direct recording sessions, which meant that I could keep directing, which was perfect. Someone who'd cast, who'd had experience in localization and project management. And it was crazy. I've never in my life seen a job description I've matched so well. So it turned out my initial assumptions were completely wrong. And worst of all, I talked myself out of even looking. And, I'm lucky they ended up catching wind of me, because it goes to show what you could miss out on if you assume the worst. Don't assume, okay, I don't have what it takes to do this. Go for it, take those opportunities. So I've been at CA now for about 2.5 years and having a great time. I'm part of an incredible team, some of which you can see here. All of us having great fun there recording in the park. And I've learned so much from these guys and from talented people across so many different disciplines. I'm able to get involved in productions earlier and have input at the initial design stage. I can work with the team to figure out how a character should sound rather than getting a brief fully formed. And I can actually help shape those character briefs and prototype and test new ideas. So take lovely Silos Tradir fan here from Total War Warhammer 2. She was one of the first characters that I worked on when I started at CA. Little bit of information about her to start off with. She was originally a prima donna whose volatility and intimidating demeanor meant that no one ever dared to deny her demands. After her vessel sank in a storm, she became a vengeful spirit who commands a cursed ghost ship of damned sailors. Her songs of death paralyze and destroy all who cross her, and basically she's a larger-than-life operatic diva with a literal killer voice. Very, very fun character to work on. So not only did we want to capture her larger-than-life persona, but we wanted to capture as much of her musicality as possible in the performance as well. First of all, by casting an amazing voice actress called Charlotte Moore, who is not only a fantastic voice actress, but could also sing, so that we could blend her singing more seamlessly into the dialogue. And since Stylostra attacks with her voice, we captured videos of those attack animations so that we could play them as a reference in the studio to make sure, you know, for reference and for inspiration, to make sure we got the correct length and the correct feel for the performance of those mighty booming operatic notes that were destroying everyone before her. And we also carefully chose which notes those were that were sung, so that we could match her to the game's soundtrack. So no matter what was happening in the soundtrack of the game, we could make sure she was always singing in the correct key. And after a really fun session in the studio, I was finally able to implement what I'd recorded into the game myself. So I was finally on the other side of that fence. And I've got to tell you guys, it was a little bit emotional the first time that I implemented the character myself, booted up the game, and I heard her in there for the first time. It's still something that gives me tingles to this day. Now, no matter how long I've been doing it, you know, a character that you've been living with for that long, when you actually get them in there and they've come to life, it's a really amazing feeling. And I'm hoping this all works. I just want to show you, I can't big her up that much and not show you a little bit of Stylostra in action. So let me just see if I can load this up now. So yeah, as you can see, pretty fun stuff. And I can also get properly entrenched in the project now for an extended amount of time. Being part of an outsourcer is really great for the variety of projects you get to work on, but being able to live with a project for an extended period of time over several months is just as rewarding. So I recently finished work on the dialogue for Total War Troy, our latest release, after almost 2 years of work. And it was really fantastic to collaborate with our sister studio, CA Sophia. They really are the nicest bunch of people and so lovely to work with. And it was really fun to see how we could incorporate elements of the Iliad into the dialogue, how we were going to bring iconic characters like Achilles to life, and how to capture the truth behind the myth aesthetic of the game in the characters and dialogue. It was a really, really fun experience that I really enjoyed and I learned a lot from. So that's pretty much it for me. But before I go, I just want to give you one last piece of advice, and that is to push out of your comfort zone. I know it's scary, believe me, from personal experience, but I really do guarantee you are capable of so much more than you think. Okay, that's all from me. Thank you for listening. And I'm here to answer any questions if anyone has anything they want to ask.
Hey, Victoria, thank you so much for that. That was fascinating. So fascinating from my point of view, because I've got a filmmaking background. So the actual is like intriguing for me, I suppose, is different, and how, like you said, the briefing process. But interested to know a bit more about how you do brief an actor to embody that character. You said because it can be a bit disjointed, or you know, what the scenes or the narrative, how you do that.
Yeah, it's kind of trying to find ways of getting that context, because it can be confusing, especially with a game like Total War, where you've got sort of lines that could be used in lots of different areas. A lot of them are standalone lines that are going to get repeated a lot. So finding a way to communicate, this is what's happening, you know, and doing it in as concise a way as possible, because, you know, no one wants to be, you know, especially when you're doing something creative, you don't want someone blathering on at you for ages between every single take. So being able to communicate that in a concise way as possible is really valuable, and, even, sometimes just being able to, say, okay, you're talking to someone, imagine you're talking to, if you want a smaller performance, just imagine you've got a group of your most trusted generals around you. If you're talking to 40 of your troops, you're going to be projecting a lot more than if it's something quite intimate. If we're doing diplomacy lines, which are some of my favorite things to do, it's kind of one of those times where it's like, imagine that you're sat across from a long table with someone and it's quite relaxed, you're having a conversation, trying to work out a diplomatic deal. So it's things like that, and also having the character brief nailed down as well. So we do a lot of work getting the character briefs into shape before we even send them out to the actors, and then we do live casting. So we've worked with them before that. We get, and basically you kind of end up workshopping the characters a little bit with the actors in those casting sessions. So you sort of getting their input as well as giving them an idea of what the character's about.
Is that part of your job to select the actors?
Yes, it is. Well, kind of. So I will find the actors to cast, and then we will book them in, and I'll direct the casting sessions. And then it's quite nice. We actually have quite a democratic way of doing it at CA, where we basically have a panel for each game of a couple of people from the audio team and a couple of people from the design team. And basically everyone listens to, I will shortlist the people I think are best for the role. I'll send those out. And then everyone will, send me back their comments and their scores. And basically it's, seeing the consensus of who thinks they're the best. So it's kind of a collaborative thing between a group of people. So.
Well, that's interesting because it's quite different to filmmaking where the director ends up often deciding. Yeah. But I think the other thing as well is, I suppose, like we worked in the industry, is just the evolution of the technology and where it's going. Because obviously, there's more narrative that be built into the game. So, what's exciting about that for you?
Yeah, that is really exciting for me because, I mean, that's one of the things that I love most about working in dialogue is just one that I've loved since I was a kid is stories in games, how stories are told in games, the fact that it's a different storytelling medium. If you look at, for example, films is a passive medium where you observe, whereas with games, it's active. You are part of the narrative. You can shape that narrative. So, it's really exciting when you play games that actually embrace that and, trying to find ways to make that active narrative. It's a different way of telling a story. And, more and more developers seem to be realizing that and what they can do with it. So, being able to, develop characters more and work more in that active medium is really exciting.
So you're pretty well set, I think. Your role's going to be increasingly important.
That's what I'm hoping. Fingers crossed.
Well, anyway, there's been a lot of comments saying thank you so much for sharing your story and also talking about your process. Oh, I've got one more question. But I'd be interested to know what your involvement with localization has been. Was this during your outsourcing time or in-house?
Well, it's kind of both. So with localization, at CA, we work alongside our partners. We've got a great team. Sega Localization are amazing, and they help us with all of our localization needs. Because for localization, back when I was at OM and at CA, what you really want to do is you want to find studios to partner with in the countries where you're recording. So if you're doing a French localization, you want to find, a French localization studio that you can partner with, because they are going to be able to direct the actors better than we are. They're going to have the talent pools, and you really want, their input on shaping how the localization is going to be. It's not, you can't really do a straight translation of a script and expect the context to still work in different languages. And especially things like humor, wordplay in one language is not going to work in another. So, it's like studios that can then look and say, well, this is how we're going to adapt it. I mean, that's one thing I find fascinating is looking at the differences between different localized versions of games and, how people have adapted it to different cultures. Working closely with partners, in those countries is invaluable.
All right. Brilliant. All right. Well, thank you so much, Victoria, for sharing your story and process. I think everybody found it really valuable.
Brilliant. Thank you. Well, thank you for having me.
Thanks. Hey. All right.
Bye, guys.